Hi everyone, welcome to our show. This is eLearnChat, and today we have a special guest, and we've got us. So I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by my good friend from Scotland, but she lives in England right now. It's Leslie Price. She's with www.learnappeal.com. Also coming soon, learnappeal.org.uk. How are you doing today, Leslie?
Hi, I'm very good. I'm very good, Rick.
Good.
Delighted to have our guest on, and also, I'm now a granny of t a whole 10 weeks. My wee
I know.
grandson is now
That's
10
really
weeks old.
That's really cool. Harold, did you show the Learn Appeal website by any chance?
I did, yeah.
You did.
Yes,
Okay,
he
good. I
did.
wasn't looking.
Yeah.
And with us also is Harold Muliati. He's a disembodied voice right now on the other side of my desk over here.
Not a ghost, so no need to fear.
That's right. And our guest today is Macdonald. You will see him in a moment. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation at www.relate.com, your training and video partner.
Hello, I'm Peter Baker. Please visit voiceovermasterclass.com to see details of the training courses I have on offer for new and existing voice talents to further their career by enhancing voice and technical skills as well as essential marketing tips.
And we are back, and in that center position of power, we've got a friend of Leslie's, a good guest, and he's with LAPD Solutions. And if you're looking at the lower third and you're in the States, that is not the LA Police Department. That is Learning and Performance Development Solutions, just so you know, so we have no confusion. Mac, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Rick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad you could join us. I know what you're going to talk about a little bit. And it's one of my actual, I don't know if Leslie knows this really, but it's one of my favorite topics about emotional intelligence and the role of emotions in learning and performance. I've given talks on that at some of the trade shows as well. It's something that we just ignore for the most part in learning and performance, and we shouldn't, because that's really the big difference between having and not having a successful training session many times. But Leslie, would you like to start off?
Yeah, I'm just absolutely delighted to have Mac along with us today. Yes, he is Mac Macdonald. That's, his proper name is Peter Macdonald, but he's Mac because it's, a Macdonald. And we probably have clan history somewhere as well, because originally I was born a Macdonald. So it's fantastic. Mac and I have known each other for quite a few years now, and I'm particularly interested in, and I didn't know, Rick, that you were interested in emotional intelligence.
Well, no, it's
And when
interesting
Mac
because
and
you had made a comment to Sarah, make sure Rick is in on this one. And I saw what the
yeah,
topic was. I go, that's one of my favorite topics. That's a good one.
yeah.
It's something that we just don't pay attention to. I think they're afraid to, or they don't know what to do with it. But it's a great topic and very relevant to today.
Yeah. So I'll let you kick off with the questions then, Rick, because you probably know more about it than me.
Oh, I don't know about that, but Mac, what got you involved in the area of emotional intelligence and really emotion, period, of how people react, what they do, what they think, and tell us about your method. I think you're calling it the Moccasin method.
The Moccasin Approach, or yeah,
Approach.
Moccasin Method. Um, Interesting little story. I'll cut it very short, but how did I find out about the importance of emotions and managing those emotions? It was actually through something where I experienced myself almost getting out of control with my own emotions. And when I say that, what I mean is I was reacting to my emotions in a very negative way. And it was only afterwards, when I thought about this and reflected, I thought, that wasn't acceptable. Had that been one of my peers, had that been my son that came across and said something in that way, I'd have really been quite shocked. So then I started thinking, well, why did I do that? Because it's not like me. And somebody very kindly pointed me to a book about emotional intelligence, nice short, sort of quick book to read. And I had a look at that, and it just completely captured me and resonated. And I could almost see through that experience I'd had with that negative emotion. So I think that's where it really initiated from.
Now you've got a military background. You were in the Army in England for 22 years. And in the military, you're taught a certain amount of emotional control. You try not to let it get to you, at least not when you have to. Usually it gets to all of us or anybody who's been in the military or experienced anything dramatic. It usually affects you after the fact. And that's another thing that happens with emotional intelligence. And I was reading a little bit about your method and the way you look at it. And tell us a little bit about how you came up with the Moccasin Approach.
Yeah, sure. As I said, sort of going through that experimental time and looking into it, reading about it, etc., I suddenly realized that there was a saying that was coming back from a lot of people I was talking to, and it was about walking a mile in another person's shoes. And when I looked into that for the first few times, I discovered it was attributed to an old American Indian saying. And then I'd read a bit more, and it came from a different tribe, then another tribe. And it was only during my start of my master's degree, when I was going through the research of the emotional intelligence, and I looked into that a bit more closely. And it actually comes from a poem written by a lady called Mary Lathrop. And that was, if memory serves me, 1895, and it was entitled Speak Softly or something along those lines. But the essence of it was, don't condemn somebody, don't judge them, etc. Don't approach them until you've considered what it's like to walk in their moccasins. So hence the Moccasin Approach came round, and we think about how we approach just pretty much anything. So your point about where does this fit into L&D in learning and training, very much so, because we try to engage not just the classroom as a whole, we're really trying to engage each individual in their own way. So by knowing that sort of social awareness, etc., that's what helps us engage and make it particularly pertinent to each person as an individual.
Yeah, it's a good one. I first heard that saying not through English literature or culture. I remember Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band back in the early 70s. And he had a song, till you know a man, you haven't walked in his shoes, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that I was the same way. That read when I was a kid. I was probably a teenager at that time. It just hit me. I was like, that's a good point, because you really don't know what anybody's like until you really have walked in those shoes. And we like to do cookie cutter approaches to everything, and they don't work. From school on, It's very hard to get everybody into a cookie cutter, because everybody has different needs, and it's a little tricky. How, from in the realm of emotion, because we are emotional creatures. Some people have less, some have more, some have none, some are psychopaths. But everyone has an emotional part that more often than not predominates. You said you had an experience where you kind of lost it. I was watching. Now you probably remember the rock group Deep Purple. Richie Blackmore was the lead guitarist, who was an incredible guitarist. And I was watching his documentary last night on YouTube, and he was talking about how he was on stage, and this girl walked up and gave him a note, and he read it, and it was just a very nice note. And a security guard just truncheoned her on the head, knocked her out, and he got so ticked, he kicked the security guard in the face from the stage, broke his jaw, got taken to prison. And he goes, I had a bad temper when I was younger. And after 4 days in prison, I really mellowed out. I decided this is not a smart way to react. So he achieved emotional control by being put in prison for 4 days. And I was thinking, that's one way to get to learn, hopefully. And he said he would have reacted differently to other situations in his life had he not done that. He slowed himself down and didn't just react. What do you see as, in learning and development, one of the major reasons why we haven't been looking at emotional IQ and emotional development?
I think, and this is from a very personal point of view, my own experience has said to me that, and it's not because I'm on an American-based event, I hasten to add, but it has been something I found that the Americans are very much into this, in that they've said, look, this is something that's quite important, and certainly in businesses they've had a go at this and had a look at it. And in my personal opinion, I think they've made some good sort of headway with it and found some benefits. And I think to some extent, in conversations I've had with training directors, business leaders in the UK, it's more about a bit of hesitancy. And I think the hesitancy is born out of a lack of total understanding. Because if you look at EI and the ingredients of EI that we talk about on our sessions, those are not complex in the slightest. And people sometimes give a sigh of relief and go, is that it? And I go, yeah, that's it. But the health warning that has to come underneath that is, but it's very hard to implement. Because like a minute ago, you were saying, well, what happens when I have this emotion? When that singer kicked that person, that's what we often used to describe as an amygdala hijack or an emotional hijack.
Yes.
And that's the problem, is that you snap based on that emotion. Whereas when he spent his 4 days in jail, I'm sure when he thought about it, reflected enough, he thought, I don't need to do that again because I know the ramifications, etc. So hopefully the next time he got sort of triggered, you might say, and he had that emotional effect, he didn't automatically think, right, I'm going to punch somebody, hit somebody, etc. Perhaps there was that even 10-second moment of, right, count to 10 and see how that goes. But I think in general speaking, they'll have a go at it, but it isn't really being had a go at properly, if that's the right way to put it. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Liz.
Can I just ask, Mac, then, is it also then connected to the whole thing about being a reflective practitioner? Because one of the things when I was teaching and also when I was working, when I was working in senior management, one of the things that was really important to me, and I used to always tell other people who worked in my teams, it was so important to be a reflective practitioner. So when you've done something, whatever you've done, think about it, look at it, not necessarily dwell on it, but, did I make the right choices? Could I have played it differently? So is that time? I mean, I don't know much about EI at all.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. There is an aspect of that for certain. There's nothing better than sitting back afterwards. And, as you know yourself, trainers, teachers, etc., are very strongly recommended to sit back afterwards and think, well, how did that go? And if there was a bit of a hiccup during the session, well, when I reflect on it, can I work out what it was so I can avoid it or do things differently the next time? The slight different side of the EI is that what we're saying, especially if you think the Moccasin approach, thinking of that other person before you have that engagement. And in fact, think even at the start of a training session, going to some lengths to finding out what are you like as an individual. So if you and Rick were on the session with me, it wouldn't be just introduce yourselves. I'd want to find out certain aspects of it. And there are some exercises you can do where it's an individual private activity where you fill in a few questions that's really giving the trainer, the facilitator, a little bit more information about things you don't like. For example, let's just say you've got a huge anxiety problem about being asked a question by name. So, Leslie, give me an answer. That is something I'd love to know before the start. If I ask that question in an open forum, you're not going to say, yeah, that's me, because you don't want to admit that in front of other people. So the Moccasin side of it is that understanding of how do they feel, what triggers them in anxiety, happiness, frustration, whatever it might be.
So a certain point, you're tailoring some of the questions and some of the way you treat people based on what you know about them, or maybe what their own personal issues are, or limitations, or quandaries, or whatever affects a person. Now, what happens when you don't have that information? Because sometimes you just don't get the information up front. As a trainer, that puts you into one of those situations, and I've been there and I've seen it, where you have a group of maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 people, and you have no idea who anybody is, what they're made of, what... Yeah. That gets tricky because you can easily nowadays get somebody going off on some sort of emotional rant about nothing. How do you handle that?
I think my gut reaction when you talked about that point was erring on the side of caution. Yeah. So, for example, if I have a large room, and especially if you think if I've got 40 or 50 people, I haven't really got the time, especially in a short session, to find that information out from each individual. Yeah. So quite often what I'll do is I'll start off and I'll be very sort of generic in my questions, and I'll avoid asking anyone specifically unless during that session I find out, for example, that Leslie has got previous information and understanding and experience in that area. I might well turn around and say, Leslie, you've got experience on this. Could you help us with this? What's your opinion? I wouldn't say what is the answer, perhaps. I'd say, what's your opinion? So I'm allowing Leslie to say something that doesn't have to be absolutely correct or agreed with anyone because it's her opinion. But
Maybe
also, you said, well, what if we haven't got that information? Sorry.
While Mac's talking, Harold, maybe we could put up the first slide, because that actually shows what the Moccasin Approach is.
Okie dokie.
I just thought that would fit in with what he's talking about at the moment.
Yeah, and just going back on something that was mentioned there by Rick, what if we don't have the information? One of the things we do with organizations, we just started it with another one, is we try to give them a mechanism of where each member of the organization fills in a form that says, if I'm going on to a training session, here's the things I'd like the facilitator or trainer to know about me. And that answering on a private or online type form where they haven't got somebody in front of them listening to them is quite powerful, because it allows me as the facilitator to say, who have I got? Thank you very much. Can I get access to their forms? Thank you very much. I'm walking into that room with a far better understanding of the individual likes, dislikes, etc.
Now, it's interesting.
Do you want me to pop through those?
Yeah, let's go on to the next one.
Yeah, on here, as you can see, it's got the self-awareness. So very brief. Am I aware of me? Am I aware of my emotions? And some people say, well, yeah, I am. But if you look at research, quite often, somewhere around in the sort of 80% figure, there is a statement about the 80% don't know actually about things they're totally aware of. So, for example, how my reaction might affect somebody. And once I understand that really as well as possible, the self-awareness, which don't forget I get from other people who are good and open and honest with me, because they'll tell me certain things. For example, Leslie even mentioned it this afternoon on a test on the Skype. She said, when you're looking for something and you're really focusing, you can look a bit sort of, I beg your pardon, Leslie, it wasn't you, it was my daughter. She says, you can look a little bit aggressive, a little bit annoyed. So understanding those little nuances about my self-awareness is good, because then we get onto the self-management and how I can manage those things, becoming aware of them and dealing with them. Almost most importantly for me is the social awareness / empathy. I need to understand those individuals, what is their triggers, what makes them happy, what makes them worried, so I can either, as in the Moccasin Approach, tailor the way I approach those individuals to what they like or dislike. Does it mean I will never challenge what they like and dislike? Absolutely not. We have to get that very clear. Emotional intelligence is not about pandering to everybody's wishes and making them all happy and fluffy. We have to have in our communication, and not just managers or leaders, but in peers, we have to have that ability to say, this is what work requires us to do, and this is where I can go with my understanding of the people I'm working with. So those are very important points. And you'll notice relationship management is emboldened, because really the golden part of this, when it works properly, is your relationships become fantastic. And if I might just steal a very quick moment for a little exercise, and this would go out to anyone watching this later, just have a think internally of somebody in your life, whether it be a family member, a great friend, who is a go-to person when you have something that you want really to discuss deeply and find out best advice on. And when you do think of that person, then think, well, what is it about them that gives me that trust, that two-way thing? How do I know they're going to tell me exactly what I need to know? And then imagine, what if we got that in work? What if so many of my colleagues, we had the relationship where I knew I could go to them, I could ask them something, and they would tell me absolutely the truth. That's one of the challenges we have with emotional intelligence, is getting people to change that protective way of saying, oh, I don't want to say that in case I upset Mac. Look, you've got that relationship now. Matt won't be upset. He wants to hear the truth.
That's a great exercise. I was just thinking of a friend of mine. I teach martial arts on the side. I've been doing it my whole life. And he's also a martial artist. He's a teacher. And every so often, if I have not a personal problem, it's just something I want to talk about, he's one of the people I talk to, because, and when you were saying that, I thought, what makes that person special? They listen. They listen. He's not judgmental. He's listening. And then he'll give an opinion if I ask for it. So he's not one who come out and immediately say, well, here's what you should be doing. No. He says, what do you think? I go, I don't know. I should probably do this or that. And then we work it out as just a nice dialogue. And he's one of those people I can trust with just about anything, because I know what's coming back is going to be part of what he's hearing, just in analyzing what I'm saying, and part of it is me finding the answer to what I'm talking to him about just by talking to him. And it's interesting. And I think that's sort of what people who go to therapy try to get. I used to call therapy rent a friend. You're renting a friend for an hour or whatever, and hopefully they tell you something or help you come to a conclusion about something, which again is all based on a lot on emotional intelligence and how you come to conclusions based on what they're telling you. Because if anybody tells you anything, you're probably not going to listen. But if you come to that same conclusion, maybe through actions, maybe through advice or something else, maybe it'll have more weight. Now, being in the military too, and obviously military police, they go through a lot of training. It's different in terms of how you train military people, except in the area of special forces. There, the groups rely so heavily on each other for trust, their lives depend on it, that their relationship isn't hierarchical as much. In fact, many times the special forces officers are just right down there with the troops, with their team, and they really do call it a very tight team doing the work. And they all rely on each other to stay alive. And so it's a different communication method that they have from standard military, which is a little bit more top down. We used to say,
but
when
then
the general
you're talking about their staying alive, okay?
Yes, yeah.
But you think that every organization worldwide needs its staff. It
Sure.
needs good people.
Yeah.
And the way that an organization actually stays alive and flourishes is very often through its people.
Mm-hmm.
So where does the Moccasin approach, Mac, where does that fit in to an organization?
Right.
Sorry,
can we nip onto that other
am I
slide?
putting you on the tiles there?
Yeah, so let's go to the other side. Here we go.
Fantastic. So just to give an idea, quite often when people look at this, they go, Mac, why isn't recruitment and induction up top, at the sort of start point? And my point is, well, this is something that I call it top down. The organization really needs to get a grip of this from the top down. They need to buy into it first. Because one of the biggest problems I find is that unless leaders and managers have a good understanding of what they're trying to produce, then they can actually accidentally cause problems right the way through. So once leadership management have an understanding of where it's going, and I'm not saying they all have to do a workshop, they have to really understand why it's there, what it's aiming to do. Then it starts right through the organization from recruitment and induction. People understand about the emotional intelligence, that Moccasin approach side of it. It goes into values and behaviors, and I'm hugely keen on this because my belief is something along the same lines that Leslie's saying there, is that organizations have values up on their websites. They even have them on the walls. They have them everywhere. And they don't live by them. That they say that they do because they want people to. But very often when I go into organizations, they'll say, well, yeah, we've got those values, but it's very hard to actually get people to live like that. So, for example, if I started working for you tomorrow, Rick, and I became one of your technicians, God help you, you might turn around and say, Matt, you're a fantastic technician, amazing, absolutely brilliant. But the other side you're thinking is, but Matt's constantly upsetting people. He's very sharp. He's not, really socially adept because I've got quite a high score on the autistic spectrum. And that could have a bit of a thing, and I do find it trips me up sometimes. But the odd thing is that quite often people have me back because I do say exactly what I think, so that they're happy with that. But as this goes round, we say to people, make sure your values are correct. And then how do I as an employee literally show to everybody that I am living those values through the behaviors I exhibit? And then, of course, we get onto the monitoring and assessment because that becomes part of my assessment. I have to be measured not just on my technical ability, but how do I behave? How do I treat others? Do I listen? You were saying a minute ago, the huge thing about that relationship with your colleague is that he listens to you. That's what has to happen. So often in business, I find that relationships don't even start to break down because they're not there. Because the person in charge just has this thing of, I've got targets, I don't care how you do it, just do it. And the other person thinks it's not worth it. And in fact, today, just listening to some of the things going on in the news, there was a classic where they were saying people don't even bother doing anything in the National Health Service sometimes because they know if they say anything, it won't be heard. It'll just be ignored. So certain aspects of things have to be really worked at through the values and behaviors. But once that goes round in that sort of full circle, then we can see that if it's constantly encouraged and supported and monitored, very important, then it'll work and it'll make that difference to people and their relationships.
You know, Mac, you're bringing up a point. A lot of this has to do with really self-observation, understanding yourself a little bit better so you have a better idea of what you like, what you don't like, what you're strong at, what you're weak at, and what triggers you. Because that's a lot of the emotional intelligence part comes down to triggering. What things make you go off? And it can happen at work. It can happen in a personal life. What are those things? And I've always said for years that if we don't teach kids, maybe not too young because they won't get it at that point, but once they become aware of themselves, self-observation, they'll probably never really develop it unless something makes them develop it through circumstances other than their own. You know, if we don't observe who we are, how we are, what we are, it's very hard for us to understand anyone else, too. If you don't understand yourself at all, how can you understand really anyone else? And most managers are never taught any self-observation skills or even listening skills. They talk about it. You know, as a manager, you need to listen. What does that mean? You know, when do you listen? How do you listen? How do you talk to people? And what a difference that makes when you get a manager that actually listens to you or talks to you as a person, not just as somebody who says, I'm in charge, you will listen. Hierarchical management still occurs in many parts of the world. It doesn't work well. It works very lousily. You don't develop a lot of great loyalty. You develop fear, but not a lot of loyalty. And
absolutely.
And that's where we are. It's everywhere. And so how do you work around some of that? It's interesting, but it does come down to, as you were saying, communicating up front, trying to listen, trying to develop empathy. And a lot of people don't even know what empathy is. How do you develop empathy? It's a tough one. Like you said, my wife is a little bit on the autistic spectrum. She's probably Asperger's, which most engineers and programmers are. She was a programmer and systems person. So was I, but I was more on the empathetic scale, which is why I rose quickly in management when I got into IT. I got jobs. One person hired me at Marsh & McLennan, a very large insurance brokerage firm. He goes, I like your smile, kid. You're in. I go, my smile? He could care less. I mean, I showed him that I was, quote unquote, technically adept, but he liked the fact that I could communicate and be friendly with people because he sucked with people. So I was his front guy that talked to the users. Made sense. I didn't know that when I met him.
It's funny. So funny you say that, Rick, because my father used to describe my mother as his right-hand person because my dad also worked in insurance. And my dad worked for one of the biggest insurance companies, insurance brokers worldwide. But my mum knew how to connect with people. So my dad eventually, as my brother and sister and I grew older, my dad used to take her on every single business trip that he went on so that she would meet up with the wives, but she would also meet up with the husbands. We used to have people around the house all the time. And my dad used to say that my mum was his biggest asset.
Well,
and when anybody in the company...
He was a smart salesman.
Yeah, he used to say, and how much does this cost? And my father said, and how much would it cost if she wasn't there?
Yep. Well, it's funny. Leslie comes with me. Now, I've got bad eyes. So Leslie comes with me, and I call her my seeing eye wife because she helps me when I have a little bit of night blindness. And so she helps with those things. But also, when we go on business trips, she has a nose for people that is amazing. It's almost like a mean dog. She's like, I don't like that person. I'm like, really? What don't you like? And she's never been wrong yet, which really irritates me. But she can pick up people right away.
She got on with me, Mac. You're all right. She got on with me.
Yeah. But boy, it's amazing how she picks up on certain people. And we've had some relationships that we knew weren't that good with in business. And the minute she met the people, it's like, nope, these people are not good. And she was right. It's like, eventually the relationship went away or whatever. But that's a talent. But she's very Aspergery in the way she acts sometimes. And she's like, what did I do? Empathy's not the biggest, though she does have it. It doesn't come out as quickly because she's much more analytical that way or much more systems oriented. So it's just interesting how, we all are different. And then that's also, Mac, for you, that's your typical biggest challenge. How do you get someone super empathetic with somebody a little colder, a little more analytical? Those clash. How do you get each other to listen? And it can work. I mean, I've been married for 35 years, so you can make it work. But it gets sometimes that doing. You're just kind of hitting heads until you figure out, okay, we better listen to each other. We better talk.
I'm conscious of time, Rick, and
yes.
The other thing that with Mac being on the show is that Mac isn't just doing this Moccasin Manager, Moccasin Approach in the UK. He is going to be bringing it to you guys in the US.
That sounds really exciting. In fact, I was thinking about that also. Mac, we need to talk off camera for a moment. But
yeah.
I see some really interesting things with the approach, and if nothing, I think a lot of people might get that I got it moment. Where they all of a sudden things maybe click in because they don't think about that kind of stuff. And that'll be good. Well, Mac, I think we should have you on again also to further go into some of this, maybe give more examples, maybe even get a little bit more practical about how we can do some of this with people. And then you can further talk about the method as well as, approaches you might take organizationally and just departmentally from small to large.
Sure, yeah, I'd be loving to, yeah.
I think that'd be fun. I'll have Sarah coordinate with you soon to get you back on soon.
I just think when you're starting this, and I say in learning and development, it's not something you come across very often. And
No.
I just think it's got huge potential. What was your final slide, Mac, just before we finish?
Oh, it was just a few ingredients of the sort of things that people could use. Because one of our very important parts is it's all about the performance that comes out at the end. It's not about what we do with the company. It's that change of performance in the workplace. And those are just ingredients that we sort of say, well, look, the top three we think are absolutely foundational, that you have to have those and understand those. The second lot are usually things that people want anyway. And then we've got what we sort of jokingly call our pick and mix solutions, where people can take those. But the thread going through every single one of those is that it employs an emotional intelligence basis with the Moccasin approach, even whether it's change management and managing development is actually what is often called managing performance. We have a very different way of looking at that. Hence, we call it something slightly different.
No,
Yeah,
sounds. I mean, I say I'm fascinated by it, and I thought that's one of the reasons I suggested you would co-host the show, Rick, because I knew it'd be something that would resonate with you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And if you're watching the show out there, Mac's information is below for his website. Go check it out. And then Mac, as you get closer to doing things stateside, and by the way, we're seen all over the world, just so you know. A lot of people in England, a lot of people around Europe, Australia. We've got viewers everywhere. I think the larger number, probably 70% are here, but 30% are everywhere else. So we've got quite a few viewers worldwide, and I think this can resonate some interest with hopefully a lot of different people, because it's one of those ingredients that's not talked about or is missing in the cake. So the cake doesn't quite taste as good as it could. So this will be a great topic to continue, and also, I hope you do make inroads here. That would be a good thing. Because like you said, we're maybe further along in some things, but we've also taken it to a stupid region too. I say kind of what I feel too many times. Gets me in trouble. But there's a lot of dumbness that comes out of a good thing. So, common sense doesn't always prevail, especially here. So we want to make sure that the people take on don't overreact emotionally, that they because then immediately everyone goes, oh my God, we haven't done anything right now, we have to fix it. No, slow down, take a step back, let's hold off. We're very faddist over here, a lot of fads, everything's a fad or a meme or something, and then they take it to an idiotic extreme, and then it didn't work and they don't know why it didn't work. Typical kind of bad management approach. But no, that sounds great.
As my granny would have said, if it's not broken, hen, don't fix it.
And sometimes that's good. That's a good approach. Yeah,
absolutely.
Mac understands exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah,
indeed. Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, well, great. We appreciate you coming on today. Was anybody in the chat by any chance?
We didn't get any messages in the chat.
During work hours, it's hard to get people in the chat. Sometimes we do. Didn't get any today, but that's typical. In January, we noticed nobody's even been around. I think they're all recouping from the holidays still. So we noticed it's been very quiet out there. But that was fun, and I think it's also extremely useful what you're talking about. And I think you've got something there. I like the Moccasin. When I first saw the Moccasin Approach, I go, Sarah goes, I'm not sure what it entails. I said, well, if you're in moccasins, you're very quiet, so you can sneak up on somebody. And she was going, no, I don't think that's it. So anyway, I think it was good.
So
Appreciate you coming on, Mac.
Mac's a big, tall bloke. I don't know that he could sneak up on anybody.
Yeah, my days are sneaking up when people are way gone.
Yeah, I'm the same way. But anyway, well, great. It's very good having you on, and let's continue this conversation. I think it's a subject we really haven't covered very much in the 10 years that we've been on, believe it or not.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it thoroughly, so thank you both very much.
Well, thank you much, and hang on there before you take off. We're going to say goodbye to everybody, and then we'll be right back with you. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
bye.
Thanks all.